Why do we suffer? Why do we despair? What do we do for those whom we love who are also suffering? What if it's you? Join us today while we discuss these questions and search for truth. So hello, my name is Bryce, and welcome to the Townsmen. We're glad you're here. And so Tim, what do we got for today?
Today we're talking about suffering, despair, and chaos. Really what I venture to explain today is a reasonable way of understanding that suffering may and ultimately is able to be taken easily, and given a sufficient understanding of God, that seems the only direction.
Yeah, there seems to be some contradictory or maybe some conflicting ideas that, well, if God is good, why is there evil or why is there suffering?
Right.
And sometimes we tend to lump a lot of these issues and these concerns into just one homogeneous category. It could be considered suffering or trials, but as we'll discuss, there's really some differences, and that ultimately, as we wrestle through the idea of suffering and God, is it random, is it by chance, or is there a grander purpose behind all of this?
Right.
If you could, then let's read through Matthew 11:30, and I think be a really good backdrop and kind of what we want to hit on today.
Yeah, and we'll hit verses 28 and 29 just to give it a little backup.
Yeah.
But starting here, again, this is Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30. This is a NASB Bible, just for anyone curious. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And we're focusing on that last verse there. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
Yeah, and this is Jesus talking to his disciples, mostly, about really what is to come in their life.
Yeah, I think if we break that verse down a little bit, almost all of it is pretty straightforward. Looking at the Greek, it's pretty straightforward. The part that catches my attention mostly is where it says is easy. Because you think, is following God really that easy? You think about it for 1/10 of a second, it's like, well, no.
Yeah.
That's hard. You've got to discipline yourself, follow the rules, treat people well even when you don't necessarily feel like it.
Yeah. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God.
Right.
With all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Yeah.
Yeah. Back to all the stuff we talked about in episode 2. Those are very hard things to do. Love and affirmation are difficult.
Yeah.
As well as they should be.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's not really what it's saying by easy. It doesn't mean it's not a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I think what it means is, and we'll get into the Greek here, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation.
Just send
but
it.
In Greek, easy is Christos, which means, in English, useful, gentle, pleasant, or kind. And I'd like to explain why his burden is useful, gentle, pleasant, and kind.
Yeah, just curious what your thoughts are on why you find this to be true, because it really is. It's a paradox to a degree. And I've heard other pastors and other theologians talk about this. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. And one idea is, well, the yoke, start there, and hopefully we're not so far detached from agriculture that we don't know what a yoke is.
Yeah.
But it's what you attach to oxen together to help plow.
Yep.
And the idea that comes to mind for me is that, well, if I am yoked to Christ in faith, he's carrying most of the burden anyways. He's not saying that there is no yoke, that there is no effort, there is no trial, but he has carried most, if not all, of the burden.
Sure.
The ultimate burden that he has carried is he died as if he was a sinner, even though he wasn't, and carrying that burden. But yeah, let's explain the whole, that his yoke is easy.
Sure. And like we were talking about just a moment ago, that it's easy to think, well, no, it's not.
Yeah.
I suffer. I'm in despair. I think if we define those things out a little bit more, we can really dig into how this still stands to be true, that it is genuinely easy. I think defining suffering would be necessary at this point. How I usually define it is simply that suffering is when we experience too much chaos.
Do you see chaos as like random or arbitrary? I guess what I'm trying to picture is we experience too much chaos. It's as if we're in the ocean and there's currents and waves and all that stuff just tumbling us around, and that's suffering?
It's basically unpredictable.
Okay.
It's what we don't know, or as I would argue, we don't know yet. And I think the yet at the end of that is operative.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. It is good. I mean, suffering can be good. I think it builds character, at least speaking personally from some of the things I've had to go through with health issues, with my dad committing suicide, things like that. It ultimately strips away all of the noise.
Yeah.
Kind of mutes out some of the things that don't really matter and really just pulls out whatever's within you.
Yeah. So the suffering can be seen as when we are out of control of our situation.
When we feel as if we're out of control of our situation.
Yeah.
Being human, when we basically don't get our way or we don't get what we believe to be good.
Yeah. One book that we recommend a lot is Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
And
by Viktor Frankl.
Very, very good book. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, where it talks about that everyone was suffering in the concentration camps.
Yep.
But there were those who had despair, which we'll talk about, but then there are those who had hope. And so I guess when it comes to the suffering and kind of how we tie that together, and when it's experiencing too much chaos, could it also be that, well, in the concentration camps, they didn't have any control.
Yep.
And there were atrocities that were happening to them.
Yep.
As well. To flesh out that suffering, good point, with it is chaos. A point of suffering can be in the waves of whatever. It could be emotional, it could be physical, or you're completely out of your element and you see it as suffering.
Yeah. And we could throw words at what suffering is. I think everyone to some degree knows it. Like you very intuitively know when you're experiencing it, like, oh yeah, this is that.
Yeah. So can suffering be good?
Ultimately, yeah. I think if we dig into 1 Peter, we can see evidence of that.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. C.S. Lewis, the classical, if there's a good God, why is there evil? Suffering in the world. And would highly recommend reading C.S. Lewis, studying it. He's a lot to chew on, so take in small chunks. But yeah, let's go to the scriptures. And what is, I think, really good in 1 Peter chapter 3, and we'll just do verses 13 through 17. The whole chapter talks about suffering as a Christian in this context. And what it says here is, again, the NASB, and who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be in dread, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give you an account for the hope that is in you, but with gentleness and respect. And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who disparage you, your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. For it is better, if God should will it so, that you suffer for doing what is right rather than what is for doing wrong. A lot to dissect there. What it first says in verse 13, sorry, this might be a little bit of an exposition, is, who is there to harm if you prove zealous for what is good? Paul also wrote about that you don't have to fear government, you don't have to fear your fellow neighbor if you are doing good. The laws that are written are meant to punish the wicked, not the righteous. And so we don't have to fear. But, as Peter writes, but if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. Far too often, I think, and this is just my opinion, kind of the prosperity gospel, or what you kind of hear in most modern pulpits of, well, if you follow God and if you believe in God, really only good things are going to happen to you. And they equate blessings as, I should get wealth, right? I should be healthy. I should be all of this. But it says, but if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. Count it all joy when we suffer trials and temptations. So, I don't know, I'm just curious. Now, what do you think about that in the backdrop of suffering there?
Well, I think the part that catches my ear on that bit of the verses in chapter 3 is where it reads, give an account for the hope that is in you. That, I think, is really what this episode is trying to accomplish. That part gives me, I guess in a lot of ways, that very essence is what feeds my truth-seeking. Because there is something in me that wants to keep going, even when I am suffering, and I have suffered a fair amount. And I would like to understand in a lot of ways why it is that I have kept pushing.
No, that's really good. And verse 15 gets used a lot. This is where you get the definition of apologetics, by the way. Have a reason for the hope that's within you. It's rather intriguing reading it in its context, and it's talking about suffering. Have a reason for the hope that's within you. A lot of times we view apologetics as well as, well, we go out and we get into arguments with people.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure we have a good reason for why we believe in Jesus. But really, I think what it's talking about is in the midst of the suffering, there is that hope that's within you.
Mm-hmm.
Have a reason for it and do it with gentleness and reverence. It's kind of this interesting dichotomy, man's search for meaning again. Viktor Frankl talks about this. In the concentration camps, he kind of saw two categories of people. There were those who, when amidst the suffering, they lived in despair, and most of the time they didn't make it.
Yep.
But those who had hope, they would. And what he examined or what he witnessed is it went beyond the physical. It was like a physiological. If you have something to hope for,
mm-hmm.
you keep on going. You keep on living. In the military, that's what we're kind of taught as well of, listen, man, it's just going to suck. It's the way it is. You're going to be cold. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be tired.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stay focused on the mission. And what a lot of dudes is they focus on, all right, when's the next meal, right?
Yep.
That little bit of hope that you can find somewhere.
Yep.
Like, all right, I can't wait to get into my sleep system tonight where I can at least hopefully get a little bit of rest.
Right.
Or, man, I can't wait to be done with this school so I can just go on and play video games.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have that little hope. And amidst that suffering, having that hope as well. So they kind of pivot a little bit then.
Yeah.
What isn't suffering? What is sometimes people consider it suffering, or they're like, oh, I'm suffering, but it might not actually be suffering.
I think most things that could be, and it's careful to parse this out,
Mm-hmm.
self-inflicted and avoidable is probably not suffering. Self-inflicted is like if you shoot yourself in the foot and you've got foot problems for the rest of your life, guess what? That's not suffering.
Yeah.
But also taking things up in, let's say, marriage, and your wife is going through something, or your husband's going through something, or your children, or really anyone in your family is going through something. If you take on the suffering of other people as Christ did, that is still suffering. That is a good thing. If you're suffering for, like we said, for something that is good, then it's still suffering.
It's kind of like, if you're a college student and you decided, say you got this big math test coming up.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. You decide to not study for the test.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do everything in your power to study for the test. You go into that examination and you're freaking out. You're panicking. And I've seen this, going through college. There's some people that was kind of their philosophy of like, oh man, I'm just going to wing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, oh man, this was awful. This is hard. This sucked. For better lack of term, like, oh, I was suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But bro, you did that on yourself.
When I think you play that out even more, it's like you failed a class because you didn't study for the test or the test before that or any of that.
Yeah.
You fail the test, you end up having to pay more, and then eventually that gets added on, and that snowballs and snowballs and snowballs and snowballs.
Yeah.
That's just foolishness.
Right.
That's not suffering. That's just you did something stupid that you know you shouldn't have done.
Right.
You basically went against your own conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really suffering. That's kind of missing the point. It has to be laid upon you.
Yeah.
Or taken up on someone's behalf honorably, if that kind of tracks.
Yeah, and Peter talks about that too, where if you are suffering because you've done something wrong, because you have sinned, I kind of see it as there are two categories, where if you are a believer, it is more about, well then God is disciplining you.
Mm-hmm.
He's leading you to repentance. But if you are outside of God's kingdom, then it's a form of punishment.
Right.
And then the ultimate punishment is hell.
Yeah.
But that's a good point, because we have a culture that loves to play the victim all the time.
Yes, absolutely.
And we see this as if they didn't get their way. Oh, it's because I'm a victim of the system or a victim of this.
Yep.
Is there some merit there? Possibly. We'll grant them possibly. But majority of the time, especially in a country like this, that's not normally the case.
Yeah, if you've taken responsibility for absolutely everything you can get your hands on and you're still suffering, that's actually suffering.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just called strife.
Yes.
Which is basically a consequence of being a fool.
Yeah. And
or could, I mean, to be fair, it could just be part of being ignorant.
Yeah, that too. That's another fun topic. And so that's where we kind of wanted to camp out here a little bit of, you might hear that far too often. It's like, oh, I'm suffering, or, oh, I'm in this or whatnot. There are these different categories.
Yep.
There are some that are legitimate. if you are suffering for righteousness' sake, understand that you're blessed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Paul that talks about this in his epistles. He was grateful that God saw him as worthy enough to suffer as Christ did, or like Christ did.
Yep.
That's radical, because we think as humans of, well, if I do good, I should get good things.
Mm-hmm.
But if I do bad, then I should get bad things. But all Paul says that is like, I got the greatest gift ever. That's salvation. That is Christ redeemed me.
Yeah.
And in return, for the rest of my life, he said, to live is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
To live is Christ. To die is gain. He would have rather died and be with his Lord, but he said to live is Christ. Well, how did Christ live? He lived the perfect life, and he suffered the ultimate penalty as well. So it's a good point. So if suffering is when we experience too much chaos, is chaos therefore outside of God's control?
I don't think anything is.
Mm-hmm.
I think by definition it can't be.
Yeah, which kind of a radical idea. To some,
bit, yeah.
It's a little bit out there to think. It's kind of like we're playing checkers and God's playing 4D chess or something.
Yeah,
but
if people just do suffer. The best people have always suffered. Jesus suffered.
Mm-hmm.
And if Jesus was God and he suffered, I think by default, suffering can't be outside of God.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be outside of his influence, outside of his control.
Yeah, kind of the touch on that a little bit. Some people think, well, Jesus couldn't have been God because he suffered. This is where the doctrine of he was fully God and fully man, when we read it, says he experienced everything that we experienced as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he experienced trials, temptations. He experienced pain, suffering, joy, all of that. And that's where in the early church they wrestled with this idea of how can, if he is God, how can he suffer? Well, the only best explanation then is he had to have been fully man, as it says.
Yep.
And I believe Hebrews, where it talks about that. And so that's where it's, I think, a blessing to know Jesus, is that he did suffer like we did, and yet he was without sin.
Yeah.
Radical for us, because we're born into sin. We're born with a sin nature. We're inclined to sin and to endure suffering. And the suffering, it could be for discipline, it could be for punishment. We're not sure sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus went through all of that, and yet he was without sin. And I think that's an immense blessing that we can go to our Lord and Savior who endured these trials as well.
Yeah.
So what is despair then? I know we've touched on it earlier.
Well, I think if you look at suffering as not being out of God's control, despair is a human experience of what we feel when we don't have a full enough conceptualization of God or of the eternal. When basically you're stuck in the mud, you have limited view, basically, and that it's just, this sucks. There's no end in sight. There's nothing to look forward to. There's no reason for any of this. It's meaningless. And you start digging into nihilism and stuff like that. When you're suffering and that's how you feel, that is despair.
So is that kind of linked to when we read or hear about depression? Do you think there's a link?
Yeah, I think there often is. And I think depression, we often overdiagnose and kind of cast that on anyone that has a streak of feeling bad.
Mm-hmm.
But if you dig into depression a little bit, I think you find its causes are usually pretty basic. All of the things we generally understand that are good for us, good sleep, good diet, good exercise, meaningful relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You're pursuing something meaningful, whether that's a job or really any goal that you could set for yourself.
Yeah.
If you have all of those little check boxes marked off, your chances of being depressed are a lot less.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you check them all and everything should be fine. I think if you check them all and you're not fine, then it is probably more like a brain chemistry kind of issue.
Yeah.
But until all of those boxes are checked out, I'm not entirely positive that calling it depression is the right way of going about it, really.
Okay. So you would argue there's more of a technical definition for depression.
Yeah, there's a technical definition for it, and I think there's really backing out from that even more. There's a very grounded, generally understood, really deeper meaning of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, well, yeah, you sit alone all day, you don't do anything, you don't sleep well, you drink a bunch of caffeine, so you're up all night. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with caffeine. eating poorly and not exercising. You're stuck inside in, like, our winters are horrible. You can't go outside and get much vitamin D because there's only your face showing, and that's not going to soak up much, and you don't want to be out there because it's cold.
Yeah.
You know, you start stacking all of those things on, it sucks.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that is depression. It maybe is, but it's not clinical depression, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I was trying to see, the definition of despair. Would you say suffering is more objective and then despair is maybe more subjective?
Yes and no.
Okay.
But I think they're both technically subjective because there has to be an experiencer for it to be experienced. For you to feel anything, there has to be something that feels, obviously. So I think they're both definitely a subjective experience. But I think despair really just ties into more of the human side of it. Well, I should say human side of it and only the human side of it. That there is no grander scheme of things, like you shared with Viktor Frankl, that if you don't have that larger picture, it's only going to suck. There is no end. There is no purpose. There is no good that it serves. I think that is despair. And I think to some degree we've all probably felt that. Even some of the more faithful people I know, when it really hits the fan, it is really hard to keep an eye on some of those things. I think it's important to flesh out here too, since we've brought up depression, suicide seems a reasonable thing to bring up as a topic. And I don't think there's a limit to the amount of suffering a person can handle. It's unfathomable to the degree in some of the books that I've read and stories I've seen and some of the people that I've known, some of the things they've gone through. It's like, I don't know how any person makes it out of that without being, just makes it out of that, really, or comes out intact, or really anything left to them. But I do think there is a limit to despair. There is only a certain amount of time you can just go on in survival mode where there is no concept of the eternal. There is no meaning behind it. There's no grand scheme of things. When it only sucks, there is an end to that. And I'm not saying this plus this equals suicide. But people are fallible, and they've only got so much energy. If you start taking all of those things away, and it's for a long time, the will ends. And I think that's what ultimately leads to suicide. Phenomenologically speaking, I think. But we'll have an entire episode on that.
Yeah, because it is important, and it's a rather sad, because one of the leading causes of death for young people is suicide. We would think, it's obesity or it's all these other things. Well, it's unfortunately that they decide to take their own lives. We want to dedicate an episode to that, just because we think it's a rather sensitive topic and kind of a personal topic.
It definitely hits home. So we will have a whole episode dedicated to that. So look out for those.
Stay tuned. So, suffering, when we experience too much chaos. I enjoy the link that you're trying to do here. So talk a little bit about chaos theory then. Or, we think chaos is really just completely random, unpredictable. Chance, or we have these terms that we use when there's something or phenomenon, something that we can't really explain yet. And one of them is chaos, which seems rather random. You don't want to define the term with the word itself, but...
Right. When we think of chaos, we usually think it's random, unpredictable, therefore void of God, and there's, to some degree, part of that is right.
Could be, yeah.
And I think if we dig into chaos theory, we can understand this a little bit better. So I think if we dig into chaos theory, basically it really just states that unrelated, insignificant, or disparate information, events, things like that, really are intricately and, I guess, infinitely tied together. So I guess when you boil that down, it really just means it's predeterminate but unpredictable. That's what chaos theory is trying to get at. You may have heard of the butterfly effect, not the movie, the actual phenomena that it is doing a meh job of explaining.
Let's do an example. One thing to kind of help talk about this is flipping a coin. So if I say, what are the chances of heads or tails? what we say from a statistics standpoint is 50-50. But if we understood the amount of force that we apply to the coin, how high the coin flies up, the weight of the coin, the aerodynamics of the coin, all of these things together, it's no longer chance. It's no longer statistically or probability. It's certainty. And it was a good definition that you have. It's holding the predeterminism, if you will, with our experience of randomness. Another idea is the sensitive dependence on initial conditions. As well.
Being the layman in the room, I'll just boil down sensitive dependence on initial conditions basically to, if you could understand and basically control each variable of, like you said, the coin flip, it would be predictable. That it goes down to the absolutely smallest detail, and when you understand those details, you can predict to some level of accuracy for a while how that's going to act. A coin flip is rather simple. Like a pendulum is rather simple, but you do like a double pendulum and it starts whipping all over the place. That is when chaos as a theory starts to come in handy for describing it, because it is predictable for a short period of time, but for anything longer than that, we can't really figure it out. Until you just run a simulation or something like that, let it run its thing, and then zoom out. And this is something, if you look up the chaos game, we'll link something down below to a video of it, that if you zoom out a little bit and you're not looking too close at the dots, and you give it enough time and you run enough iterations, it eventually creates order. It's odd. But that's how the butterfly effect works. That's how chaos theory works, is that these seemingly completely unrelated things, you'd think you play this equation out and you're just going to get random points all over the place that'll eventually fill in the whole triangle of this chaos game. Again, watch a video, pause it, come back if you need to. That's how it works.
I like that. And it also kind of reminds me as well of, we think as a pretty technologically advanced society, right? We got computers, we got TV, we got AI now, all this stuff. And we think we have a good understanding of some of this stuff, right? Like electricity. Yeah, we can harness this electricity. But what's even funny is that we can't fully explain how electricity actually works. Like getting down to the atomic level to all this. For a while, we thought, well, it was a transfer of electrons, of like one electron going to another. But now they find out, well, it's not actually transferring electrons. There's a force between the electrons that's pushing another force around, or the law of gravity. It's a law. It is stated fact that gravity exists. But why does it happen? Why do two masses have this attraction to one another? And you come up with all of this stuff. And so it kind of adds that begging the question, is there a creator behind this all, or is this just random? Is this just that thing? So let's then jump into, well, if things are predetermined, do we not have free will then?
From our understanding, yeah. I think if you look around, you'll find different scientists who have a little bit more reductionist sort of understanding of things, that know brain chemistry and how all of these things and portions of the brain cause certain things and this, that, the other thing. And they would say, no, you don't have free will. It's like your brain does things before you think you're doing things, and your consciousness of it is an afterthought of it, or an effect of it. It isn't a cause. But if we are to understand it from God's perspective, or at least the best that we can understand of that, those two things aren't necessarily contradictory.
One fact that it comes down to is, how do we define free will? And one definition that I use is, it's the ability or the opportunity to choose. If that's your definition, then great, I'm on board. It's all about that. What I find intriguing is, who gives you the opportunity to choose? Who gives you the desire to choose? Who gives you the ability to choose as well? And this is where, for me personally, where God kind of comes back into the picture. There are all of these factors, like you said, the sensitive dependence, we're kind of getting back to that. If we could zoom out and see all of the different factors at play, what we think might have possibly been free will was maybe more determined than we thought. But what do you think of that?
How I think of it is that we have free will, but ultimately a sufficiently wise and intelligent creator would have known what we were going to choose from the beginning of what we call time. And things could very well have been basically right down to that sensitive dependence on initial conditions, set in motion in just such a way that it is still predeterminate that we would have made those decisions, but it doesn't mean we didn't make them. He was wise enough to know It was wise enough, depending on how you want to define God or the eternal, was wise enough to know what our decision would be. And I always use the analogy of children and parenting. A parent watching their child do something stupid knows how it's going to end. Doesn't mean the child didn't get to choose it. And it's a very simplistic, very grounded human understanding of it, but you zoom that out on a universal, infinite scale, and that's basically what we're looking at.
Okay.
As far as I can tell.
Yeah. No, I like that. So Isaiah 45:7, this just speaks about the sovereignty of God. It says, the one forming light and creating darkness, causing well-being and creating disaster. I am the Lord who does all these things. It's a radical idea. No, I've been saying that a lot, but it's a radical idea that, well, when we think we're suffering, it must be because we've done wrong. It must be because God hates us. It must have been maybe he woke up on the wrong side of the bed one day and just says, you know what, Tim, I want you to suffer for a few years. Just why? Well, just because I want you to suffer. It's like, no, he creates, he forms, and he does all these things. Not to say, I think it's a false understanding of God's sovereignty, is that he's this puppet master.
Right.
That is pulling the strings right now at everything we do. And this is where in James talks about this as well.
Okay.
No one is to say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. It's the idea of like, well, if you believe that everything is predetermined and all that stuff, then God made me sin. He made me a sinner. We just want to balance those two out. When we bring God back into the equation of suffering, he's the one that does it all. He's the author of these things. Not to say that he is pulling the strings, not to say that he is making us do this. He's the one grabbing our hands and causing us to do these things. But I just think it's a paradox. It's a paradox that we do have to wrestle with. And some lean more on the free will side of the house, which then the argument is, well, who gives you the opportunity, the abilities, and some can lean very heavily on the sovereignty side, which then it does beg the question of, well, then does God make me sin? Does God make me do these things? And so it's that balance. And as you have written here, I think life can be understood by looking back, but only lived forwards. And maybe if you want to expand on that a little bit, what Kierkegaard was hitting on, which I think it's a good point.
Yeah, it ties back exactly to what we're talking about in chaos theory, that after a certain while, it is unpredictable. It is still predeterminate. There was a way it could end, but we don't know exactly how that is after a certain amount of time and prediction. But looking back at it, you could read a double pendulum or read something that seems chaotic and measure it and write it down and do the maths. And look at that. There's order being made. And that is, I think, true in mathematics, true in physics, true in everything, and true in life. That it can only be lived forwards, but can be understood backwards. Like, I can understand the ins and outs of my life over the past 20 or so years ago. I could not have told you this is where I'd end up, but it makes sense now.
Yeah. It reminds me of Joseph in Genesis. He was the one that, if you'd read it, and later in Genesis, it reads that he was sold into slavery by his own brothers, brought forth in Egypt. He was the one that was accused of sleeping with Potiphar's wife, even though it didn't happen. Fast forward through all of these events, the last thing that he says is just quite remarkable. I don't have it in front of me. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good.
Right.
And yet when we look back of like, well, exactly like you said, at the time, this sucks, this is awful, don't like this at all. God, why are you doing this to me? And then you look back and like, oh, that's why you sent me here.
Got it.
That's why you did this thing.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me personally sometimes too where, do I have a lot of regrets in life? Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes, and that if I knew what I know now, and I would go back and tell my younger self, basically almost force my younger self to not do those things, I probably would.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a no in the sense of, well, God orchestrated that perfectly. His plans are perfect, and his plans are for good.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes to wrap our mind around that this is ultimately for the good for those who love him.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but for those, like you said, those who have faith, those who have hope, we hope for these things, and that is part of faith, is we hope for the things to come, the things to pass.
Yep.
So,
and tying back to what we talked about earlier, of give an account for the hope that is within you,
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Is that there is reason to understand that this suffering, this experience of too much chaos can eventually, given enough time, look back, it will have been made into order. Order will have come from it.
Mm-hmm. So, order from chaos. I'll read this part out and then see if we can expand upon it. Order is made from chaos, as it must be so. If it happens beyond our control, it may be built into the fabric of reality, so naturally we would feel and act in that way, being, so to speak, its children.
I think what I'm trying to get at with saying something like that, tied into the rest of the things we've talked about, is that on a human level, understanding religion and having faith, we would think, well, yeah, God eventually has this handled. But someone perhaps more skeptical, like I very much am, would be like, well, okay, so a book, a couple 100,000, whatever time frame you want to put on how old the Bible is or what iteration it went through. It's like, yeah, okay, but that doesn't really mean much. Sure, it's in different religions and whatever, but is there a grounding for it? And I think once you understand chaos theory, once you understand what the Bible is teaching you and what other texts still certainly teach you, is that when all of these things are heading the same direction, it's probably true. That's basically looking at it scientifically. Mm-hmm. Are there numerous data sets that tell you the same thing, tested different ways, and if they all say the same thing, given I'm not too prone to confirmation bias, they all seem to be pointing the same direction. When I was trying to understand suffering, when I was trying to research chaos, I was trying to disprove what my preconceptions were. Of, no, it's just completely random and we just happen to cast meaning onto it because we can see it in reverse and we're just throwing a nice cozy framework around it so that we feel good and then we can share it with other people so that maybe it sucks less in the meantime, but it's not really real. Mm-hmm. My point of saying all of this order coming from chaos is it's in the math. And if our mathematics work in just such a way that these seemingly disparate random data points eventually come to something equivocating order, then it has to be built in so deep that naturally it would come out in us. That it is God, that he's so wired that way, that he's built it into the very fabric of existence. And we are its children. We come from the earth. We come from God. We come from our parents. We come from all of these things. All of these things come together, and they're all pointing the same direction. That's really what I'm saying about this whole episode, is you've got religion saying this. Mm-hmm. You've got the mathematics saying this. You've got, in a lot of ways, our own intuition telling us that. Yeah. Whether or not we follow that, whether or not we listen to our conscience, whether we give in to our baser desires when we are suffering and falling into despair, there's a better way forward than to just be stuck. There is a reason to be hopeful. And the reasons aren't just an archaic book that you could argue out of existence if you really felt like it, and the new atheists have done their damnedest at that. But that these things are so built in that your hope really can be multifaceted.
Yeah, that's excellent. So here's my question to you. Can you science, right?
Can I science?
Can you science? No. It seems that the golden calf in today's culture and some aspects of culture is you cannot question science, and that you can be so certain about science that it's like indisputable, right? 2 + 2 = 4, indisputable.
Okay.
Right? Gravity, indisputable. My question to you is, and we don't have to put this in the podcast, but this is something that for me, I've had a similar experience of.
We're actively thinking it out. I'm down. Send it.
Can we be as certain as we are with science about matters of faith and religion?
On an individual basis, I believe you can. But ultimately, and my point is not in any of this to say that religion is scientifically provable.
No. Yeah, that's not what I'm getting at.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Can you be certain in your faith? Yes. Can you be certain with a scientific understanding of your faith? Probably not, but it seems reasonable, at least to me, and I'm, certainly still prone to failure and to being unreasonable and irrational.
Yeah, as we all are.
But it seems to me that if everything is pointing that way, it's probably true.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't speak as someone who just has such a strong faith in the scriptures, in the Bible, or pick a faith really, that I can speak just from that and be absolutely certain of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how I'm wired. I need these multivariable analysis of something to like, okay, that seems pretty solid.
Yeah.
I'm willing to act on that as if it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say that from a strictly, Christian understanding of the Bible, because that's not really what I have. That's not where I'm coming from.
Sure.
It has to be across the board, all of these things shoot in the same direction.
Yeah.
And we're just going to work off of that until we have better information.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So in some traditions or understanding, there's a thing called divine revelation and natural revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Natural revelation is exactly that, is what does nature reveal to you?
Sure.
And then divine revelation is, well, thus saith the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So one understanding, and this is where sola scriptura,
Mm-hmm.
is that Scripture is the ultimate authority in matters of faith and conduct.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible doesn't say everything about everything.
Right.
That's not what his intention was, but rather it was the divine revelation that God spoke to the prophets and the apostles, saying, this is what I reveal to you from my mouth, spoken through the prophets. And in the same token, even the Scriptures talk about this, that nature speaks of God, his divine attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, having been clearly perceived ever since the dawn of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so historically, the sister of science was theology.
Mm-hmm.
In the more modern mind and the more modern presupposition of you have to separate and disassociate those two, that wasn't the case historically speaking, to where those two thoughts, religion and science, theology, all the different ologies, right?
Mm-hmm. Those epistemologies, their way of understanding truth, how you came to your conclusion.
Yeah.
I think theology is one.
Mm-hmm.
Science is another.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they're tools of understanding what I would call the same thing, which is the eternal God, whatever you want to put on it.
Yeah. Honestly, man, that's fantastic. I love that, and I'm glad we're on this journey together.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I asked that question is within church settings, I have met people, when I ask that question, they're like, well, no, we can't be as certain about theology as we are about science. I go, well, why not? And vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Well, science is just the Antichrist. We couldn't bring science into the church. I'm like, well, why not? You know, what? If you believe in a divine creator, he is the God of science and the God of theology. He's the God of it all.
One of the beautiful things in that really is if you look back at, I may be getting the title wrong, but you'll get the essence of it.
Mm-hmm.
Galileo wrote a book called, and this is where I might be inaccurate, the Principia Mathematica. Basically,
Principles of mathematics.
Yeah, basically where science came from as it evolved as time went along and changed into something we know now today. But in like the foreword, you could call it, he said, I hope to present this information to show the beauty of God. Yeah. It was never meant to be devoid of God. It was never meant to explain something outside of it. Crick, I think, one of the DNA guys that discovered how that works, said basically the same thing. He wasn't trying to do this and understand and describe and discover DNA to disprove a God. That's a new atheist move.
Yeah.
Like in the videos that I was watching to understand chaos, I was noticing, I watched one from the early 90s, and I'll link both of them, and the excitement and the love that these guys had for their craft. I mean, watching a completely brain beyond my capacity explain something so complicated in such a simple manner as, I think he was talking about cheese dip and how it bubbles and how that expresses chaos, and he's excited to talk about it. You watch them describe the process of science and mathematics, and you compare that to another documentary I watched that's talking about the same subjects. And in the very beginning, the guy's saying that basically we don't need God. It's like, no, these two things are not separate.
Yeah.
One can be understood separately than the other. One is trying to prove something that is provable in any sort of naturalistic, somewhat reductionistic sense.
Yeah.
One doesn't do that, but that doesn't mean they're separate.
Right.
They're both epistemologies. They're both tools to understand truth.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think that's what they're doing.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Like, you can examine a particular thing. Like you said, when there's that exclusion of something that shouldn't be excluded, or like you cannot, right?
Right.
These oughts, like you cannot bring God into the equation, or you cannot not bring God into the equation, something like that, you know? Because even on the other side, too, there is a form of religion that's kind of like a fanaticism or a mysticism. There are wrong understandings of God too, and you know, we are finite beings trying to understand an infinite being. And so that's great, man. That was really good. You know, again, that order from chaos. And so to kind of bring it back, what I really like, Ecclesiastes, a book in and of itself, phenomenal book. I know you can say that about every book in the Bible to a degree.
I'm sure you've said that about every book so far that we've read from.
Sorry, but Ecclesiastes, they equate it to Solomon. He was considered the wisest man, or one of the wisest men to ever live. And a famous part, a lot of people know this, is Ecclesiastes 3:8, and it says, "There is an appointed time for everything. There is a time for every matter under the sun. A time to give birth, a time to die. A time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to tear down, a time to build up. A time to weep, a time to laugh. A time to mourn, a time to dance. Time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. Time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. Time to search and a time to give up as lost. A time to keep, a time to throw away. Time to tear apart, time to sew together. Time to be silent, time to speak. Time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace." Read the whole thing. It's a beautiful poetry. But what Solomon is hitting on is there is a season for everything. There is a time for everything. And it's hard for us to put a timestamp of when it will start and when it will end. We just accept the reality that is happening. So in some people's lives, maybe you're listening to this right now, maybe you are in a season of suffering. Maybe you're in a season of celebration. Maybe you're in a season of despair, but then there's a season of rejoicing, a season of chaos, a season of, you know, where it seems like everything's falling together perfectly. This just ties back that God has appointed, as it says, there is an appointed time for everything. For everything. And my hope for those who are listening is that, listen, that appointed time, it's not arbitrary, it's not random, it's not what you consider what might be meant for wrong. God might be using it for good. What you might think is good might actually be wrong too. Sometimes we need a correction on that. But I don't know, what do you think? Kind of in that tying in that there's a season for everything, or kind of that order from chaos.
Yeah, you know, it reminds me of a poem by a Lebanese author named Gibran. It's a whole book of poetry titled The Prophet. Basically, it's about this very wise man, a prophet. He's leaving a village, and all of the people that are from that village come to him and are basically asking, leave us with something. And he goes through a whole bunch of different things, and this bit here is titled Joy and Sorrow, so I'll read this shortly. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say, joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. Verily you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and your joy. Only when you are empty and you are at standstill and balanced, when the treasure keeper lifts you to weigh his gold and his silver, needs must your joy or your sorrow rise or fall.
The two are inseparable.
That's exactly what Ecclesiastes 3:1-8 reads.
Yeah, no, that's solid. That's solid.
I think really to close this out, we'll just touch back to what it said in 1 Peter, is to give an account for the hope that is in you. This is what we've got. Now you go look. look into what we've talked about, look into some other things that you know or don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Have a reason for it.
Yeah. A reason for the hope that's within you. This is your personal hope. What do you latch onto when everything goes awry or when everything's going well for you? What hope do you have? And who or what do you cling to?
Yeah. On the very day that my father committed suicide, I was sitting on the front steps of the house. There was medical examiners, police, all sorts of staff walking back and forth from where he did it and where I was sitting. And I remember staring at a tree. It was a very beautiful day, a little bit of a breeze, still leaves on the trees. And I remember thinking of that verse in Matthew when he talks about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air and how they toil not. That they didn't have to store anything up, that they had faith that God would provide. And I remember thinking very clearly, it may not make sense now, but I had to trust that it would. It's like, I don't understand what the plan is, but that doesn't mean there isn't one.
And that's our hope for you guys too, everyone who's listening. Find that hope that's within you. Have a reason for that hope that's within you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Tim. I know we'll have a longer episode. We'll probably dive into that a little bit more.
For sure.
Yeah. So suffering, it's going to happen. It's inevitable.
Life is suffering. That's ultimately what it is.
It's built within the fabric of our existence. But we believe there is a God. It's not random. It's not arbitrary. And we want you to find that hope that's within you. Whether you have hope or faith in God, if there's something else that gives you hope as well, we want you to examine that and see if that holds water as well.
Yep.
So
you gotta dig.
Yeah.
And sometimes you gotta dig really deep.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the suffering will do that for you. Because everything else, all the niceties, the fun conversations, the drinks with friends, video games, nice music, whatever, those things go away. You gotta dig deep for those things that really give you hope.
Yep. Because things will level out eventually. Order shall be restored.
Absolutely.
Well, again, thank you for stopping by, the Townsmen. Glad you guys came, and talk to you next time.